And so today I would just like to share with you really some of the recent works that we have been doing, where we try to really focus on pushing the application of GANs in several aspects in geosciences, mostly in computer vision. Just quickly, a little bit about where is KFUPM, in case this is your first time to hear about my university. We are located in the most eastern part in Saudi Arabia. We're pretty close to Bahrain, Qatar, and so World Cup is pretty close to us also. And this is how our university looks like. It's pretty green and nice. It's very different than the most of Saudi Arabia. If you are here, if you have a chance to visit Saudi Arabia. And one thing is quite unique about our university, we are sitting directly on top of a salt dome, in a carbonate formation where they first discovered oil in Saudi Arabia. So again, our location is pretty unique and quite historical by itself. So in case if you have, in the future you visit Saudi Arabia, you are most than welcome to come and visit our university. Just like to quickly acknowledge all the collaborators that have contributed in this work and in any previous work that leading also to this works. And again, this is really a big team efforts that I have presented to you today. So I'd like to acknowledge all these people. So let's start with why do we want to use AI really in geosciences? And mostly I would like to come with these three main reasons. The first one is that nowadays, with all the digital informations, transformations, and also the advancement in technology, we really have a huge volume of data sets coming into our desk, right? So then we need to have a way to analyze this in really optimum or optimized way. And this is really where AI comes, right? And then the second one, as we know, some of the analysis that we are doing in geoscience are quite qualitative and at the same time also repetitive. And again, this will be a good place for AI to be applied. And the third thing, as I mentioned, is mostly when you're talking about geology, geoscience, we are quite biased and subjective when we are doing our own interpretations, right? So in this case, there is a saying that if you, with the same data, with the same image, for example, if you bring 3 geologists, then you'll have 3 interpretations, right? Well, this may be good, but in the same time, we try to minimize this, right? Because otherwise, it will really reduce the reproducibility of our work or our interpretation. So this is mainly the 3 main reasons. And also, as you can see, how really the studies and research and publications have really picked up in the last few years when it comes to applying AI in geosciences. So I think this is really the right time for us to have our own taste and how can we really apply this method in geoscience. There are definitely many different applications, many different reasons why you want to use AI, but in most of my works, I mostly focus on the computer vision part. And this is quite unique in geology because in geoscience, because we really deal with image analysis in our day-to-day job. And the good thing in geosciences, we are dealing with sort of multi-scale image dataset. We have from like satellite images, kilometers, hundreds of kilometer scale, all the way down to core data from subsurface, which could be like a meter to centimeter scale, and then petrography, which is a thin slice of rocks that can be observed under optical microscope. And this is mostly in micron scale. And then if we look into the way we use these images is somewhat quite similar to if you think how a computer actually looks into features in images. Because the way we use these images in geosciences, we try to look at their salient features, right? Not really in tiny details, but we look at their salient features and try to come up with this sort of diagram, a geological diagram to represent the actual real world conditions. And this is sort of, in concept, it's very similar how computer vision in the early days look at images, for example, when they're trying to when it's trying to understand a cat, it will look into different salient features in a cat, like a cat has 2 ears, pointy ears, long tail, so on and so forth. And we try to analyze this based on these features. So then I'd like to jump a little bit to the future, how the future looks like in terms of applying AI in geosciences, and this will really set the stage of, to give us the motivation why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. And if we look into the geosciences, the main problems really falls into these two challenges. The first one is that we have a costly data set. Sometimes it's very difficult to get the data set. It can be quite costly, especially if you're dealing with oil and gas industry. And another thing is quite important, and something that we don't have yet the method to mitigate this, is the labeling task. Because unlike in the computer science field, for example, if you're trying to label cars, trees, different animals, you can outsource this labeling task to just anyone. But in geoscience, you really need to have an expert, right? And to hire an expert to label your dataset will be also, at the same time, will be very costly. So if we just quickly look into this typical Gartner's hype cycle in many technological advancement, typically when you have the innovation trigger and we have all these inflated expectations of the technology, and then we reach to this peak of expectation, and then we will pass through sooner or later the trough of this illusionment, right? And then from there, we really start to realize the actual value of the technology, and then we reach to this slope of enlightenment, and then we'll reach to this plateau of productivity. Now, the main question is, in geoscience, in terms of applying AI, where are we now? Yeah, we're probably in these two main points, but I'm trying to be a bit more positive about this. I hope that we already pass this trough of this illusionment and we're already here. Right, we're already realizing the actual value of AI in geoscience, and how do we move forward about this technology. But personally, I would like to offer sort of different scenarios using the same curve here, that we could have 3 different completely scenarios in terms of future of AI in geoscience. Is first one, if we keep doing what we are doing now, just sort of using brute force, applying AI everywhere, I think we'll be reaching to plateau of productivity very soon, right? Because the data set is still the main problem with us. We don't have like benchmark data set to use in geoscience mostly. So then we will not be going anywhere pretty soon, right? If we can actually develop a benchmark data set, and then this will be openly accessible and required minimum labeling, then it will really inflate our inflate the application of AI in general. And the third one, if we can combine all this with explainability, then again, once you can have people to put more trust in your model and in your predictions, I think we will really reach to the actual slope of enlightenment in this curve here. So then my works really try to focus on the second and the third parts here, where we really try to focus on how can we work with developing a data set, openly accessible data set, not necessarily real data set. That's why I'm using GANs here, and also with minimum labeling. And then later on, we try to also apply or try to look into the explainability of our model. So in general, my approach here, or our approach, our group here, can be divided into 3 different areas. The first one is related to the data set. How can we create a data set, and also push the labeling processes into either minimum labeling or no labeling at all, right? And then from there, we try to build our sort of geoscience focused model, where the model is really designed to work with multi-scale, multi-attributes geoscience dataset. And then from there, we can also look into the different potential applications once we look into these two first areas. So in today's talk, I'll be mostly focusing on the first one. I'll a little bit show you into the second and third one, but most of the efforts really still in the first part here. So this is coming from one of my earlier paper earlier this year, that I'm trying to still focus on using like a normal CNN methods, where, as we know, like as many of you or some of you knows, that in geoscience, we typically, again, have very limited amount of data set, mostly in the order of hundreds to thousand. Rarely we can reach, 10,000 and 100,000. Very rarely we have that amount of data set, unless if you're dealing with like a remote sensing data set or some subsurface data set, which is mostly not accessible, right? It's very confidential. So, and one thing that's also sort of naturally inherited in geological or geoscience data set is the imbalance problem. As for example, here, if you are looking into different fossils or animals, this is just naturally imbalanced, right? So if we are using like different methods to make it balanced, then it may not actually resemble the actual condition or the actual situation, right? So we cannot just do like a simple oversampling and undersampling to make our data set balanced, because the actual condition or the actual data set is imbalanced by nature. So in this situation or in this condition, I'm trying to apply sort of like a bag of freebies, but it's mostly I'm trying to find a good match, a strategy that matching all these different methods that can be applied in different geological data set. In this case, I sort of proposed a method combining sort of more advanced augmentation using cut mix and cut out, and also using class weight to overcome or to mitigate the imbalance problem instead of doing oversampling, synthetic oversampling or undersampling. And the last one is to apply label smoothing. And what we found from this curve or chart here, you can see that when we apply our proposed method, it really improves the training processes. And also later on in the prediction of the different geological data sets. I will just briefly mention this, and if you are interested with this study, I'm happy to chat more, and also this is already published here. It should be available. If you don't have access, just let me know. I'll be happy to send you the copy of this. So this will be like the starting point of my work. And then recently I've moved a little bit to focus on GANs. How can we really use GANs to also sort of tackle these problems? And why GANs? As many of you already know, that GANs, they use these three different sort of ingredients, which is the generative model, the ability to generate something from random noise, and then they use also this adversarial mechanism, which is the antagonism between two models, which is the generator and the discriminator, and then they use neural networks, right? And this has really become like a big thing back in 2016, which was introduced by Ian Goodfellow and others. And you can see, I guess, the applications of these methods almost everywhere now. This is how it looks like in a very simplistic manner. Typically you are trying to create something which is a fake or synthetic images that really resemble or replicate the actual images until the expert, or in this case, for example, geoscientists or geologists, will not be able to differentiate the real and the fake images, right? And we have seen this. Like, for example, this is part of the deep fake, where they can just create different human faces and with how they look like, and the combination of all them, which is quite astonishing for an algorithm to be able to do this, right? So then again, this is one of the motivations why we want to move to GANs. So now the idea is, now we have this problem. We have limited high quality labeled data set. And then our solution is, how about if we are using GANs to create realistic data set? And in this case, first GAN is by itself is unsupervised method, right? So you don't need to actually label data set. But if you make it with some condition, then you can create almost unlimited amount of self-labeled data set as long as it's quite realistic, so then you can use it later on. So this work is mostly the work that I've been doing with my student, Mr. Ivan Ferreira. And again, this part of work is also already published and then, it should be accessible to all of you. So a little bit background about this work. We are using almost 10,000 images and representing different classes, major rock types in geology, from igneous rocks, sedimentary rocks, and metamorphic rocks. And we try to make all these classes balance. They have around 2,500 dataset each class. And also with a quite high resolution, right? Because, typically as a geoscientist, you want to have your data as high resolution as possible because it will also help in the actual analysis. And one thing is quite important is also to look into the magnification levels, right? Because, some grains or some minerals, they can look quite different under different magnifications, right? You will be able to see several details. So we also want to make sure that our data set having this variation, so that it will also help in the training processes and later on in the generation of all this synthetic data set. So this is how it looks like, the actual real data set. Then what we use here is we use a style-based GAN, right? And why we use style-based GAN is because, again, this is a data-driven unconditional generative image modeling. And with style GAN, it's really allow us to do a style transfer. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened, but yeah. Another thing is really cool about style GAN is that it uses progressive growth and also skip connection ideas, and it's very stable to train comparing with the other style GAN and also other GANs. And as you can see here, none of these thin sections are real, actually. This is all synthetic thin sections. And if this is your first time to see it, then maybe some of you will think, okay, yes, this looks real. And some of you will completely say, yes, this is totally synthetic. Then how can we go about it? How can we actually evaluate this result? So what we use as a quantitative evaluation, we use this FID score to look at the distance between the real images and the generated images. And I think this is one of the commonly used metric to evaluate this synthetic images nowadays. And with this score, the lower the score, the better for the generated images. I mean, it looks quite real or very close to the real images, right? So what we have achieved with this resolution is we achieved 12.5 fit score, which if we compare with other microscopic image generation, is typically in the range of 7.3 to 22.8. So, and we know we can actually generate a pretty good images here. And one thing is quite exciting also that, as you can see, thin section images or petrographic images, they can have quite a wide range of textures, colors, and all these tiny details, and GANs can actually replicate all these details, right? And another thing that we did or we used is we actually create a survey, because I think at the end of the day, you want to make sure that these images can be or useful or can be used by other geologists anywhere, right? Anywhere else. So then we create a survey where we try to ask opinion from subject matter experts, which is geologists with different backgrounds, right? From undergraduate, postgraduate, so on and so forth. And what we found from all these more than 200 respondents is that the result is quite consistent, actually. So the image that they found or they incorrectly identified in all backgrounds, they actually did the same. They identified the images incorrectly, right? So for example, if in this case, if I have like a real images and I will just show whether this is real or fake, and some of these respondents actually thought that this is a fake images, what actually it's real, and vice versa. So again, this is just to confirm that our model or our generated images is actually pretty good or pretty close to what we expect from real thin section images. So then, as the title of my talk, then we try to repurpose also this method. Now we have this method, we call it PetroGAN, where we will to generate almost unlimited amount of dataset related to this petrographic dataset. But as we know, as I already mentioned, in geoscience, it's not all about petrographic dataset, right? We have many different types of dataset in many different scales. So what we found, if we are using the same model, PetroGAN, without actually using the weights, so without actually pre-train them, it is actually quite, can be transferred to many different cases. Like in this case, this is a pollen dataset, right? Which is coming from plants. This is typically in micro to nano scale, and we can get even lower FID score there. Yes, the image is quite simple compared to PetroGAN, and that's probably why they can achieve such a low score here. And the same here, if this is your first time to see that this is a foraminifera, which is a type of animal that lives even today in the ocean. And as you can see here, we can also use this to generate the synthetic images of these fossils and get a pretty good FID score here. So we know that also our model that we are trying to propose for petrographic dataset have this high transferability. Excuse me. So then the second part is we try to use it for data augmentation. I'm sure like in many fields that you have also tried to use this, like try to use GAN to augment your data. But honestly, if you look into geoscience, mostly in this area, like in working at the rock samples, so on and so forth, most people, they are still using a normal augmentation, which is like random cropping, zoom in, zoom out, so on and so forth, right? Well, it may be work in some cases, but I don't think that's the optimum way to do it. But then that's why we try to use GANs or the dataset we generated, the synthetic dataset, to augment our actual or real world dataset and see how they go about with the normal binary classification. So in this case, the first experiment that we did, we trained with real samples and tested with real samples. So then we get pretty high accuracy. Again, in this case, this is all transfer learning, means it's pre-trained with ImageNet or other big datasets out there. And then in the validation, we get this 91.2%. And in the second experiment, we train with synthetic only. We don't actually show the model, the real dataset, and we test it with real samples. There is a slight improvement in the validation. The training is much better, but at least we can see some improvement here. And our last experiment is actually to augment the dataset, right? Because we start with, I think, around less than 1,000 dataset, but now we augment it with the synthetic samples, and there is quite a jump in the validation score here. And this is, we are using a very simple network without transfer learning in this case. So then again, this is go back to sort of my first approach that in this case, GAN actually can really have help us train CNN first, moving away a little bit from transfer learning, because as you know, transfer learning has its own limitations and issues. So we just try our best, right? How can we move away from transfer learning and also use some of this method to help us augment our data set, right? And for this simple case, specific case, it seems that, GAN or the synthetic data that we generate from GAN can really help us with the classification, binary classification, in terms of data augmentation. Another thing is we just finished the training recently is actually to train GAN itself for other geological data sets. And as we know, and even for the model that I use for PetroGAN, GAN typically requires, image dataset in order of 10,000s to millions, right? And that's why you can really train GAN. So in this case, again, go back to the actual problem. We don't have that in geoscience, right? So then some people will say, yes, you can do that only for petrographic dataset or only for specific dataset, but other type of datasets, actually, there is no way we can collect that amount of dataset. So then we try to answer this by using the PetroGAN to actually pre-train the GAN and then train it for other geological dataset. So in this case, we can train GAN only with less than 1,000 images for these specific objects here. This is called OIT grain, which is this circular grain, which has very significant information for a geologist, especially to tell about the ocean chemistry, the hydrodynamic conditions, so on and so forth. So this grain is very particular, it's very important. And that's why we also want to look at whether it's possible to generate these images or synthetic images with only few dataset. And what we found is by comparing, again, a very simple comparison here, if we try to just train GAN from scratch with this amount of dataset, it will not converge. It didn't converge at all, and only achieve very high fit score, which is not something that we want to have. And then we can also, there are a couple of datasets available out there, not related necessarily with geology, like the celebrity faces, right? The CFAR10 dataset, it still gives us quite a high fit score, right? It means you cannot really generate good synthetic images there. But then when we start pre-train it with PetroGAN, it lower the fit score by like 50% or more. But it's still a big question for us whether it's actually converging. We stop the training because it seems it's quite plateau. It doesn't improve anymore. And if you remember that in PetroGAN, we have different classes. We have igneous rocks, sedimentary rocks, and metamorphic rocks. And in this particular grain, this is part of sedimentary rocks, right? This is typically very common in carbonate rocks. And then that's why then we thought that, okay, let's look into the sedimentary rocks in PetroGAN, and we pre-train it only with the sedimentary part of PetroGAN. And what we found is actually can give us a much better value, and also the trainings actually converge, right? So then in this case, we know that this data set is not only useful for data augmentation and so on and so forth, but also we can use it to pre-train GAN for other geological data sets, right? And it will hopefully in the future then really push the applications of GAN in many different aspects in geology. So one of the few last slides here, one thing that we just also very interested recently to do is to do something which is towards self-supervised. And this is all, again, still mostly driven by GAN. So what we use here, we use a method, what they call a few shot or one shot GAN training, where you just need to, for example, here, this is scanning electron images of rock, very fine grain rocks. This gray part, this is the grain mineral, and the black area here, the black pixel is actually pore space. And for example, in oil and gas industry, pore space is very important. So the ability for us to actually recognize the pore space or segment the pore space will be very important. And in the past, and even until today, we typically do it manually, right? You segment the pore space and then you quantify it based on the ratio between the pore space and the grain. So in this case, we train GAN, and then from there we only label one image here, right? We only label the pore space here, which is this pink reddish color here, and then the rest will be the green. And then from there, we just try to predict everything in the synthetic example. So this is all synthetic examples, right? And then as you can see, they're actually doing pretty good job in segmenting the pore space only with one or a few labels. And in this case, we can achieve 91% mean IOU. So, if we can use this in different applications, this really will minimize the labeling task that we are mostly struggling with. So a little bit extension of this work is we do what they call auto shot. Again, still from the same paper by Tritong et al. In 2021, where we actually now, after we train with one shot, then we move this into real data set. Yeah, so you just bring the real data set and then put it in GAN, and it will be able to do this inference and get you the output, the segmentation map as an output. So in this case, it's a little bit different than the one before. This, again, we try to segment this fossil or this animal, foraminifera, and look at their chambers here, and also the core or the center. And from there, you can see again, we can get quite a good result, and getting almost like 82% in the mean IOU. The great thing about this method now is that it can generate a labeled data set, yeah, especially for segmentation, because segmentation will be the most tedious part, I guess, in terms of labeling. And in this case, you just bring your data set, and then you can generate the label automatically, and that's why it's called auto shot. So once you have this, then you can also use this for other segmentation problems. You can use the normal UNet, for example, to do for your own specific interest. So in general, this is mostly what we have been doing here, and this is the way we try to repurpose GAN that we already trained. So just quickly here to conclude that, I guess personally, I will say that the future is of AI in geoscience is pretty bright and very exciting. Why? Because there are just so many type of data sets that we have in our hand, and the technologies keep advancing. Now it's just our job. How can we actually look into which technology that we can apply, properly in our data set, instead of just apply all this technology blindly. GAN itself, as an algorithm, it's proven to be quite highly adaptable, and can be used in a wide range of geoscience datasets and problems. And I think, having this approach could at least, not really solve the problem, but at least give an alternative. How can we go about this limited imbalanced dataset and also the labeling problems? And at the end of the day, I guess in every field, like integration between expertise, subject matter expertise, and AI is always the key if we really want to push the application of AI in geosciences. So that's all, and I hope that I don't take much of your time. So that's just a funny example here where you can make a thin section dance, actually, again with GAN. So that's very quickly. If you're interested in our research, this is our group here at KFUPM. Please feel free to send me an email. I'm very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.